"Your work is garbage," she said, hitting delete in front of everyone. "Begin again." I watched my project disappear, then answered my ringing phone. "Yes, I will take the $500,000 offer to join your team. My name is Bradley Shaw. I am 55 years old, and 3 months ago I watched my supervisor, Victoria Cole, destroy what she thought was nothing but spreadsheets and meeting notes. She stood behind my workstation, announced to our entire department that my year of effort was worthless garbage, then pressed delete while 23 people stared. What she actually erased was the invisible foundation holding Nexus Solutions together. And when my phone rang 30 seconds later with a $500,000 job offer, I realized she had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most satisfying destruction I could have ever imagined. Before I tell you exactly how watching her panic became the sweetest moment of my professional life, let me take you back to where this really started. 18 months ago, I joined Nexus Solutions as a client relationship coordinator. The job description made it sound boring. Maintain communication records, schedule follow-ups, and track client satisfaction metrics. What they did not mention was that our company was hemorrhaging accounts faster than anyone wanted to admit. And the previous person in my position had lasted exactly 4 months before quitting without notice. Victoria Cole, our department supervisor, made it clear from day one that she considered my role unnecessary overhead. She was one of those people who believed business relationships were purely transactional. Send invoices, deliver services, collect payments, repeat. The idea that clients might want actual human connection was foreign to her systematic, cold approach to everything. But I saw something different in those first few weeks. When I reviewed our client files, I found page after page of dry communication logs that read like robot conversations. No personality, no warmth, no indication that anyone at our company had ever bothered to learn anything personal about the people sending us thousands of dollars every month. So, I started doing something that seemed radical in that environment. I began treating our clients like actual human beings. When George Henderson, who ran a mid-sized mechanical parts manufacturing company, mentioned during a routine check-in call that his golden retriever had just been diagnosed with severe hip problems, I made a note. 2 weeks later, I followed up asking how the treatment was going. He was so surprised that someone remembered. He spent 20 minutes telling me about his weekend trip to find a specialist veterinarian. When Eleanor Vance celebrated her textile company's 15th anniversary, I sent a personalized message acknowledging the milestone and asking about her plans for growth. She ended up scheduling an additional consultation session that brought in $12,000 of unexpected revenue. These were not grand gestures or expensive gifts. I simply listened when people shared pieces of their lives, remembered what mattered to them, and followed up in ways that showed I cared about their success. Victoria never understood what I was doing. She would walk past my workstation and see me typing what looked like casual conversation notes, and I could feel her disapproval radiating across the office space. During our monthly reviews, she would flip through my activity reports with visible frustration. "Why are you spending 45 minutes on calls that should take 15?" she would ask, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "Efficiency metrics show you are processing fewer interactions per hour than optimal." I tried explaining that longer conversations were building stronger relationships, that clients were specifically requesting to work with me on new projects, and that our retention rate had improved by 37% since I started personalizing our approach. But Victoria only cared about numbers that fit her spreadsheet formulas. What she did not realize was that I was building something far more valuable than efficient call logs. I was becoming the bridge between our company and the people who kept us in business. Clifford Stone, who owned a chain of specialty bookstores, started calling me directly when he needed anything, instead of going through our main number. He told me he appreciated talking to someone who remembered that he was passionate about vintage mystery novels and that his daughter was studying literature at university. Month after month, I watched our client satisfaction scores climb, while Victoria remained focused on efficiency metrics that completely missed the point. The breaking point came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Our CEO, Garrison Croft, was reviewing department performance when he mentioned that client retention had reached an all-time high. He specifically praised our relationship management approach and suggested expanding the personal touch strategy across other departments. I watched Victoria's expression shift as the credit for improved retention landed on what she considered my inefficient methods. After the meeting ended, she cornered me near the supply room. "I do not know what kind of performance theater you are running," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But this company succeeds on professional excellence, not social hour conversations with clients." She assigned me to complete a comprehensive audit of all client interactions over the past year, demanding detailed documentation of every communication, every follow-up note, and every relationship-building effort I had made. It was clearly intended as punishment. Hundreds of hours of bureaucratic busy work that would pull me away from the actual relationship building that was driving our success. But I approached the audit project with the same attention to personal detail that I brought to client work. I created intricate records showing not just what communications had occurred, but how those communications had translated into business outcomes. I documented the referrals that clients had generated, the expanded services that George Henderson had purchased after we discussed his company's growth plans, and the contract renewal that Clifford Stone had signed early because he trusted our partnership. The finished audit was 53 pages of proof that personal attention to client relationships was directly responsible for over $200,000 in additional revenue. Every casual conversation about weekend plans or family celebrations had strengthened business ties that competitors could not replicate with their generic professional approach. I was proud of that audit. It represented not just a year of work, but a year of genuine connections. Victoria called an all-hands department meeting on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. She announced that we needed to review our client relationship protocols, and that my audit would serve as a case study for discussion. I assumed she was finally ready to acknowledge that personal attention was driving our improved performance. Instead, she directed me to display my audit files on the main conference room screen while the entire department watched. Then she began dissecting every personal note, every conversation detail, and every relationship-building effort as evidence of unprofessional boundary violations. "This is exactly the kind of inefficiency that undermines our service standards," she declared, scrolling through months of careful documentation. "Personal chit-chat about pets and hobbies has no place in business communications. These files represent a complete failure to maintain appropriate professional distance." I felt heat spreading across my neck as 23 coworkers watched her tear apart work that had generated significant revenue for our company. She was presenting my greatest professional accomplishment as a cautionary tale about what not to do. But then she did something that crossed a line I never expected her to cross. She pulled up the file containing my complete audit database. Every client note, every relationship detail, and every conversation record. Her finger moved toward the delete option while she continued talking about the need for professional standards. "This entire approach is garbage," she announced, her hand hovering over the deletion command. And then she clicked delete. I watched a year of relationship building disappear from the screen, 53 pages of documented connections that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, gone in one vindictive moment. The silence in the conference room was absolute as everyone processed what had just happened. Victoria turned away from the screen with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting me to accept this humiliation and start rebuilding my work according to her preferred methods. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. While she was destroying my documentation, she had not destroyed the actual relationships I had built. My phone started buzzing before Victoria had finished explaining her new efficiency protocols. The caller ID showed Summit Advisory Group, a consulting firm that had recently formed and was growing rapidly. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still shaking from watching my work get deleted in front of everyone. "Bradley," said the voice on the other end, "we have been watching what is happening at Nexus, and we want to talk." The conversation that followed would change everything. They knew exactly who was responsible for the relationships that kept major accounts happy. "We are prepared to offer you $500,000 annually to join our team," they said, "plus equity participation and complete autonomy over client relationship strategies. We believe personal attention is the future of business consulting, and we want you to build that future with us." I understood immediately what they were suggesting. They were not asking me to steal clients or violate any legal agreements. They were simply pointing out that if I left Nexus and clients decided they preferred working with someone who remembered their dog's health problems and their daughter's college plans, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Victoria was still lecturing about professional efficiency standards. She noticed my return and paused her presentation. "Do you have questions about our new communication protocols?" I looked around the room at people I had worked alongside for 18 months, then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being destroyed, then back at Victoria's expectant expression. "Actually," I said, "I have something to announce. I am resigning from Nexus Solutions effective immediately. I will be joining Summit Advisory Group as their Director of Client Relations." The conference room went completely silent after my resignation announcement. You could hear the air conditioning unit humming in the background and someone's pen clicking nervously against their notepad. Victoria's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that looked almost like panic. "You cannot just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered, clearly thrown off by this unexpected development. "There are protocols, notice requirements, transition procedures." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer I had just received. "My employment agreement allows for immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment or professional misconduct. Having my work deleted in front of colleagues while being publicly humiliated qualifies on both counts." CEO Garrison Croft, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Bradley, perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any hasty decisions." But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Victoria had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would get to experience the consequences just as publicly. "There is nothing to discuss," I said, gathering my personal items from the conference table. "My decision is final. I will submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel 23 pairs of eyes following my movement. Victoria called after me, her voice higher and tighter than usual. "You are making a huge mistake. Summit Advisory Group is a startup. You are throwing away job security for some fantasy about relationship building being more important than professional standards." I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. "We will see which approach proves more valuable." Within 24 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed my exit interviews, and started my new position at Summit Advisory Group. Their office was smaller than Nexus's, but filled with energy and excitement. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that business relationships were built on genuine human connection, not efficiency metrics and standardized communication protocols. But the real validation of my decision came in the weeks that followed, as I watched the natural consequences of Victoria's actions unfold with devastating precision. I had not reached out to any Nexus clients. I had not made sales calls or sent recruitment messages. I simply updated my professional profiles to reflect my new position and continued being the same person who had spent a year building authentic relationships with people who needed consulting services. The first call came on Thursday morning, 3 days after I started at Summit. George Henderson, the mechanical parts manufacturer whose golden retriever I had asked about, called my new office number directly. "Bradley," he said, "I heard through the professional network that you have moved to a new firm. I wanted to congratulate you and ask about your new company's capabilities." We talked for an hour about his business needs, his expansion plans, and his dog's improved mobility after the specialist veterinarian treatment. By the end of the conversation, he had scheduled a consultation meeting to discuss transitioning his account to Summit Advisory Group. The second call came that same afternoon. Eleanor Vance, whose textile company anniversary I had celebrated, wanted to discuss her upcoming project needs with someone who understood her business philosophy. "I have been working with consulting firms for 12 years, she told me, "and you are the first person who ever made me feel like my company mattered beyond the invoice amount. If you are offering the same personal attention at Summit, I am interested in making a change." By the end of my first week at Summit Advisory Group, I had received calls from 6 former Nexus clients. Meanwhile, back at Nexus Solutions, Victoria was starting to realize what she had actually deleted when she destroyed my relationship-building documentation. She had no records of who these clients were as people, what their preferences were, or what personal details connected them to the firm. To replace me, Victoria brought in her nephew, Clarence Cole. He was a 26-year-old business graduate whose primary qualification was being Victoria's sister's son and sharing her obsession with cold efficiency metrics. Clarence immediately took over my former accounts and began implementing what Victoria called the new automated relationship protocol. I heard about the disastrous results through my client calls. Clarence began sending automated, templated emails to clients like Clifford Stone, asking them to fill out 10-page feedback forms rather than having a conversation. When Clifford called the main office to ask about an ongoing project, Clarence reportedly told him that phone calls were an inefficient use of consultant time and directed him to submit a support ticket through their new online portal. Clifford, who owned a chain of vintage bookstores and valued traditional personal touch, was furious. He called me at Summit the next day. "Bradley, they put this kid Clarence on my account," Clifford said, laughing but with clear irritation. "He sent me a robot email and told me to submit a support ticket when I wanted to discuss my business growth. I have been with Nexus for 4 years, and I have never been treated like a ticket number. I want to move my account to Summit immediately. How do we start the transition?" As the accounts began to slip away, Victoria's panic turned into desperation. According to a former colleague who was still working in the department, Victoria held an emergency meeting where she demanded to know why clients were leaving. She blamed Clarence's lack of experience, but she also refused to abandon her transactional philosophy. She decided to call the clients herself to convince them to stay. But instead of listening to their concerns, she argued with them. When she called George Henderson to ask why he was transitioning his account, George explained that he preferred working with me because of our personal connection and mutual trust. Victoria actually argued with him. She told him that business decisions should be based on service quality and software efficiency, not personal chit-chat about dogs and hobbies. She said he was making an emotional, unprofessional decision instead of a sound business decision. George was insulted. She was lecturing me on how to run my own company and choose my partners. George told me during our next consultation meeting, she basically called me stupid for valuing trust. That conversation made me realize I would never do business with Nexus again. By the end of my first month at Summit Advisory Group, 14 former Nexus clients had either transitioned their accounts to us or initiated the transition process. These were not small accounts. They represented over 60% of the annual revenue for the Nexus Client Relations Department. Victoria's automated protocols and Clarence's robotic management had turned a minor departure into a catastrophic client retention crisis, and the fallout was just beginning. As the second month of my employment at Summit Advisory Group began, our growth was explosive, but the team at Nexus Solutions was not going to watch their major clients walk away without a fight. Victoria Cole was facing the reality of a department that had lost 60% of its annual revenue in under 8 weeks. Her job was on the line, and she decided to play dirty. One morning, my new boss at Summit called me into his office. On his desk was a certified mail envelope containing a cease and desist letter from Nexus Solutions' legal department. The letter claimed that I was in direct violation of a non-compete and non-solicitation agreement. According to the document, I was legally barred from working for any competitor within a 50-mile radius for 2 years after leaving Nexus, and I was strictly prohibited from contacting or servicing any former clients. Attached to the letter was a copy of the contract dated 18 months prior, the very week I had started at Nexus. At the bottom of the final page, in clear blue ink, was my signature. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. I knew for a fact that I had never signed a non-compete. When I was hired at Nexus, my employment contract was a standard at-will agreement. I had specifically refused to sign any non-compete clauses, and the HR department had accepted my contract without it. I looked closely at the signature. It looked exactly like mine, but I knew it was impossible. Victoria had realized that the only way to save her position was to stop the client exodus by legally locking me out of the industry. She had gone into my old personnel files, found a signed expense report or my original onboarding document, and forged my signature onto a retroactive, backdated non-compete agreement. My boss at Summit looked at me. "Bradley, if this contract is real, we have a major problem. Our legal team cannot defend us against a clear breach of non-compete, and we might have to suspend your work with these clients." "It is not real," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I never signed this. I rejected the non-compete on my first day. Victoria forged this to save her own skin." "If you want to prove that," my boss replied, You will need more than your word. They are threatening to file an injunction in federal court by the end of the week. I did not panic. Instead, I hired a certified forensic document examiner named Dr. Eris Thorne. I paid him $3, $500 out of my own pocket to analyze the copy of the contract they had sent. I also provided him with several documents that I had actually signed during my time at Nexus, including physical expense reports and my original, authentic employment offer. Dr. Thorne went to work with microscopes, electrostatic detection devices, and ink analysis. Within 48 hours, he handed me a comprehensive forensic report. The results were indisputable. The signature on the non-compete was a digital composite. Victoria had scanned my signature from a $45 travel expense report from 12 months ago, cleaned up the background, and printed it onto the fake non-compete page using a high-resolution laser printer. Dr. Thorne pointed out that the paper alignment, the toner distribution under magnification, and the microscopic signature boundaries showed a perfect match with the expense report signature, down to a tiny ink smudge on the letter Ian Bradley. More importantly, the ink signature was actually printed toner, not physical pen ink, which was a clear sign of forgery. Armed with this forensic proof, I did not just send a response to their legal department. I decided to deliver a fatal blow. I had my lawyer draft a formal complaint and a letter addressed directly to CEO Garrison Croft and the board of directors of Nexus Solutions. We did not send it to Victoria. We bypassed her entirely. In the letter, we cited California Penal Code Section 470, which makes the forgery of employment contracts a criminal offense. We stated that because the signature on the agreement was forged, the contract was void ab initio, null and void from the very beginning. We made it clear that any attempt to enforce this fraudulent document would result in immediate criminal charges against Victoria Cole, as well as a massive civil lawsuit against Nexus Solutions for malicious prosecution and tortious interference with business relations. But we did not stop there. We included a second legal argument that targeted Victoria's position directly. We pointed out that Victoria's actions, including the public deletion of the client interaction database, which was proprietary corporate property, and her subsequent forgery of a legal document, constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty to Nexus Solutions. By attempting to cover up her managerial failures with criminal fraud, she had exposed Nexus Solutions to millions of dollars in potential legal liability and permanent reputational damage. We attached Dr. Thorne's forensic report, showing the side-by-side comparison of the forged signature and the expense report under microscopic magnification. I sent the package via courier on a Thursday afternoon. I knew that Garrison Croft was a pragmatist who cared about the company's survival above all else. When he saw that his department head had committed criminal forgery to cover up a client loss she had caused, I knew exactly what he would do. The response was almost immediate. Less than 24 hours after the package was delivered, my phone rang. It was Garrison Croft himself, and the tone of his voice was completely different from the last time we spoke in the conference room. "Bradley," Garrison said, his voice quiet, "I have reviewed the materials you sent. I want to apologize on behalf of Nexus Solutions. We are withdrawing the cease and desist letter immediately, and I want you to know that Victoria Cole is no longer with the company." He went on to explain that the board had held an emergency meeting that morning. Once they saw the forensic evidence of forgery under California Penal Code Section 470, they realized Victoria had put the entire firm in jeopardy. They had terminated her employment for cause immediately, without severance, and were considering filing their own lawsuit against her for breach of fiduciary duty. "We are facing a severe crisis here, Bradley," Garrison continued. "Without those clients, our client relations division is collapsing. I want to know if we can find a way to work together. We are prepared to offer you the position of Director of Client Relations with a salary of $300,000, full authority over the department, and a formal public apology." I sat at my desk at Summit Advisory Group, looking out the window at the city's skyline. I felt a wave of satisfaction, but I also knew my answer immediately. "I appreciate the call, Garrison," I said, "but I have no interest in returning to Nexus. You only valued my methods after you lost millions of dollars. I am happy where I am." The destruction of Victoria's career was complete, and she had done it entirely to herself. But the story was not over yet. The restructuring of Nexus Solutions was about to begin, and it would lead to a final perfect resolution that I could never have planned, but was happy to watch unfold. The departure of Victoria Cole left the client relations department at Nexus Solutions in absolute chaos. She had spent years running the division as her personal fiefdom, and without her, the rigid, transactional system she built began to fracture. CEO Garrison Croft tried to step in to stabilize the situation, but he quickly realized how deep the damage went. His first action was to address Clarence Cole. Without his aunt's protection, Clarence was completely exposed. Garrison reviewed the communication logs and the complaints from major clients, including Clifford Stone's report about being told to submit online tickets for business strategy discussions. Garrison reportedly called Clarence into his office and fired him on the spot, citing incompetence and gross neglect of client accounts. Clarence left the building that same afternoon, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, his brief career in consulting over before it had even begun. But firing Clarence did not solve the primary crisis. Nexus Solutions was bleeding money. In the consulting industry, cash flow is directly tied to active monthly retainers. With 60% of their major clients transitioning to Summit Advisory Group, Nexus was facing a revenue shortfall of over $150,000 every single month. They had expensive office leases, high software overhead, and a large payroll to maintain. To make matters worse, the Nexus board of directors was not content with simply firing Victoria. They wanted to protect the company from any potential shareholder lawsuits. They hired an independent audit firm to review Victoria's entire managerial history. The audit uncovered not only the forged non-compete contract, but also several instances where Victoria had misused company funds, expensing personal luxury trips as client dinners. Armed with the audit results and Dr. Thorne's forensic handwriting report, the board filed a formal criminal complaint with the local police department. Victoria was placed under active investigation for forgery under California Penal Code Section 470 and grand theft. News of the investigation leaked into the local business community, and her name became toxic. The woman who had stood in a conference room and declared my work garbage was now facing potential prison time and the complete destruction of her professional reputation. While Nexus was collapsing, my life at Summit Advisory Group was thriving. The transition of my core clients was complete, and the results were beyond our expectations. George Henderson's manufacturing firm signed an expanded 3-year contract with Summit, worth $450,000 annually. Eleanor Vance not only brought her textile business to us, but also referred 2 of her largest distributors, adding another $200,000 in annual recurring revenue. Our team at Summit did not treat these clients as numbers. We sat down with them, listened to their growth plans, and tailored our consulting services to their specific needs. My new bosses recognized the value I was bringing to the firm. 6 weeks after I joined, they called me into the executive office and presented me with a revised compensation package, increasing my base salary and granting me a 5% equity stake in the company. 2 months after my resignation, the inevitable occurred. Garrison Croft realized that Nexus Solutions could not survive the fiscal year. Their stock value had dropped by 45%, and bank creditors were threatening to call in their loans. Garrison reached out to Summit's founders requesting an urgent, private meeting to discuss what he called a strategic asset transfer. He wanted to sell the remaining client accounts of Nexus Solutions to Summit Advisory Group. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning at a neutral conference space downtown. My bosses at Summit asked me to attend as their lead advisor, knowing that I understood the clients and the internal operations of Nexus better than anyone. When Garrison walked into the room, he looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. The confidence that usually defined his presence was gone. He sat across the table from us, opened his folder, and looked directly at me. "Bradley," he said, his voice quiet, "I want to thank you for coming. I know we did not handle your departure well, and I regret that we let Victoria's actions escalate to this point." "We are here to talk business, Garrison," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "Let us look at the assets." Garrison presented a list of the remaining 28 client accounts that Nexus still held. They were smaller accounts, but they represented a stable foundation of mid-sized businesses that had not yet transitioned because of their existing contract terms. He proposed that Summit buy these contracts for $1,200,000, which would allow Nexus to pay off its immediate bank debt and liquidate its remaining assets. As I reviewed the list, I noticed several accounts that had been neglected during Victoria's final months. I looked at the founders of Summit, then back at Garrison. "We are interested," I said, "but we are not paying $1,200,000. Many of these clients are already unhappy with the lack of service under Clarence. If we take them, we will have to spend significant resources rebuilding their trust. Our offer is $750,000, and we want a complete release of any historical liabilities." Garrison winced. The price was low, but he had no leverage. He knew that if he rejected our offer, Nexus would be forced into bankruptcy within 30 days, and the clients would walk away to other firms anyway, leaving the company with nothing. He looked at his attorney, then looked back at me, letting out a long sigh. "We accept the terms, Bradley. We will have the acquisition agreement drafted by Monday morning." The company that had dismissed my relationship-focused methods as worthless garbage was now selling its remaining business to us at a steep discount, negotiated by the very employee they had publicly humiliated. The acquisition of Nexus Solutions' remaining client accounts was finalized on Monday morning. Summit Advisory Group officially took ownership of the 28 contracts for $750,000. It was a clean transition. Because I already knew these businesses and their history, I was able to reach out to each of them personally within the first 48 hours. I did not send them automated forms or direct them to support portals. I called them, remembered their past projects, and assured them that their accounts would be managed with the same personal attention they had always deserved. Within 30 days, we had stabilized every single account. The revenue from these new clients paid back Summit's acquisition cost in less than 5 months, and the firm's monthly recurring revenue climbed to an all-time high. With our expansion, Summit needed to grow its team. We opened 6 new positions in our client relations division. I was the one conducting the interviews, and I ended up hiring 4 of my former colleagues from Nexus who had been laid off during the restructuring. They were good people who had been forced to work under Victoria's toxic, transactional protocols, and they were thrilled to work in an environment that valued genuine connection. 6 months after leaving Nexus, my bosses at Summit promoted me to senior partner. My equity stake was increased to 10%, and my total annual compensation, including performance bonuses and profit sharing, exceeded $600,000. I was no longer just a coordinator working in the shadows of a micromanaging supervisor. I was helping run one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. Meanwhile, the collapse of Nexus Solutions was swift and absolute. After selling their client accounts to us, the company was a hollow shell. They laid off the remaining staff, terminated their expensive office lease, and were eventually absorbed by a regional competitor that focused on low-cost, automated services. The Nexus brand name disappeared from the market entirely. Victoria Cole's legal troubles concluded later that year. The criminal investigation into her actions led to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. She was sentenced to 150 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and was ordered to pay $18,000 in restitution to Nexus Solutions for the misused funds. But the legal penalties were nothing compared to the professional consequences. The business consulting community is small, and reputation is everything. No firm would hire a former manager who had been criminally convicted of forging an employee's signature to cover up account losses. The last update I heard about her came from a mutual acquaintance who ran into her at a suburban office park. Victoria was working as a part-time, low-level data entry clerk for a small logistics company, earning a fraction of her former salary and working under supervisors who monitored her keystrokes and efficiencies metrics. The irony was perfect. The woman who had ruined her own career in the name of cold efficiency was now trapped in a system that treated her as nothing but a transaction number. I felt no malice toward her when I heard the news. My satisfaction did not come from her suffering. It came from the validation of the principles I had fought for. Victoria believed that business was purely transactional, that clients were assets to be processed, and that employees were overhead to be managed through metrics. She believed she could delete a year of my work with a single click of her mouse because she only valued what could be typed into a database. But she was wrong. She forgot that business is built on trust, and trust is built on human connection. You can delete spreadsheet files, but you cannot delete the loyalty of a client who knows you care about their success. You cannot delete the respect of colleagues who watch you stand up for your work, and you cannot delete the truth of what works in the real world. Today, 2 years after watching my project disappear from that conference room screen, I look at our division at Summit with pride. We manage over 80 major corporate accounts, representing millions in annual revenue, and we do it without support tickets or automated relationship templates. We do it by listening, remembering, and treating every client as a human being. The best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is not an elaborate scheme of sabotage. It is simply succeeding so spectacularly elsewhere that their failure becomes the natural contrast to your success. When you let incompetent managers experience the natural consequences of their own poor judgment, the story writes itself. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had a boss try to take credit for your work, or dismiss your efforts as worthless, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. We have all dealt with a Victoria Cole at some point in our careers, and sharing how you overcame their toxicity can help others realize their own value. And if you enjoyed hearing how deleting my audit database became the catalyst for Victoria's downfall and my promotion to senior partner, please hit that like button and subscribe. We have many more stories of workplace revenge and corporate karma coming your way, and you do not want to miss a single detail. Thank you for listening, and remember, never let anyone tell you that building real relationships is a waste of time.